Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I am back with my co-host Jeff Cohen. It's been 2 weeks for us. We've been off a little bit. Our schedules have been a little crazy, the postseason stuff, everything going on. October is kind of that month where I feel like we all take a half step back from the world of prospects and everything along those lines as we start to kind of gear up for the offseason. But with that said, there's still stuff going on. The White Sox have a ton of prospects in the Arizona Fall League right now, which we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to do kind of a fun little different episode here where we review the Mike Shirley era. We're going to go through the last 4 draft classes that have been the ones fully under direction of Mike Shirley and see just kind of how the growth of the farm system has been and from a drafting perspective, right? So we've talked about, we had an episode last offseason where we went through kind of like, all the draft classes in the last 10 years just to see the progression. Now we're going to really harp on the just the last 4 and see where everyone's at from the past 4 draft classes that have been under Mike Shirley and kind of walk through, where we see these draft classes going and where everyone within these classes are at. First of all, Jeff, how are you? It's been a little bit.
It's been a little bit. It's good to see you again. It's good to be back in the saddle. And, all year long, we've been podcasting about how interesting and what great upside so many of these minor leaguers have in the White Sox system. And I'm sure people have been a little dubious about it and think maybe we're just homers. But when you look at these last 4 draft classes, you'll see that there really is some impressive talent in the minor leagues. Mike Shirley has just killed it.
Yeah, 100%. It's impressive. I mean, we're going to go through and talk about it in a bit here after our opening segments. But, you look at it and it's pretty obvious that after his first draft class, things have gotten really, really strong from a drafting perspective. And the first one's always hard in a position like that, right? And like it's coming off a COVID year too. They didn't even really have scouting in 2021, right? Like they barely even saw guys the year before. That was a messy draft and we'll go through it. It's still some good picks in that draft for sure. But the last 3 drafts have been really strong. We're going to dive into that. I want to give everybody a heads up. We're starting to get going on some offseason stuff. I'm going to have a bunch of player interviews coming soon. I've got one with Raku Nishida and Riley Gowans coming up soon, which I'm super excited about. Talk about the Birmingham Championship. I'm going to get Sean Burke on here soon. We're going to get some more of the 2024 draft class guys in. I'm going to have a lot of player interviews, so definitely keep an eye out on the FutureSox page for player interviews. It's a great way to just learn about these players. I always try to preach, there's more to a player than what we see on the field, right? It's worth trying to know these players and get to know them, and that's one thing I'm going to try to do through these interviews. So keep an eye out for those. Me and Jeff will keep going. We're going to have some really fun, creative episodes. Hopefully get some guests on to join us throughout the next few months in the off season before free agency starts and everything. We're going to try and get some really good content out there. So we've got a lot of stuff coming up. We will start here today though, before we dive into the fall league and the draft class. This week, Jeff, there was this report from saying Jerry Reinsdorf is open to selling the White Sox and is in active negotiations about it, whatever that means. What was your initial reaction to seeing that?
Well, I'm not as close to it as some of the guys in Chicago, and they're just laughing at it. But yeah, from everything they've said and everything I can guess, it's just Jerry with the build me a stadium or I'll move my team playbook, right? I mean, it's every franchise and every league seems to do it.
Yeah, that was my reaction completely. You nailed it there. Personally, I think it to me felt very much like a give me money, Chicago, or I'm going to sell them and somebody's going to move them to Nashville or whatever it is. And that's the Dave Stewart group is supposedly the group that's the top suitor for the team to potentially buy it. And then Stewart's been a guy that's been rumored to be part of the try and bring a team to Nashville group. Like there's a lot of these stories going around. And at the end of the day, I don't buy Jerry Reinsdorf selling. I just don't. He doesn't strike me as the type of guy. I think he's going to go down with the ship, and I do think like he will end his life as the owner of the White Sox eventually. Like that's really what it seems like to me. I think it'll get passed down to his kids. Maybe when he passes away, then the family decides to sell it. Maybe, but for now, I really just don't see him selling. I think this is a ploy, and I think it's him trying to get more money from the city.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same page there. Not much to talk about. I know it would be nice, right? I think a lot of people, I put out a big, long, guide to the offseason for the White Sox a few days ago that I wrote for Just Baseball. And a lot of people's reaction was like, oh, well, this changes. Everything changes if Jerry, if Jerry sells the team. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. I would love for things to change and for the White Sox to go ball out on some free agents and with a new owner who has a ton of money. Like, sure, that sounds awesome. Is that going to happen? Is that going to happen? If it ever happens, is it going to happen this soon, this offseason? I doubt it. Is it going to happen at all anytime in the next few years? I also kind of still doubt that. So we'll see what happens. I'm not putting much stock in that potential change of organizational shift. And shout out to Britt Garoli, who was the reporter from The Athletic, who was on that story about Jerry being open to selling. So we'll see what happens. But I want to shift now to the Arizona Fall League, because there's a guy in the Arizona Fall League, Jeff, that we spent the whole season talking about, and he struggled this year, right? Like, he had a lot of ups and downs, and I think the general public view of him, and especially from White Sox fans too, has gone down a lot this season. Colson Montgomery opened the season as the top prospect in the White Sox system consensus, right? Noah Schultz pretty deservingly jumped into that first spot because he was incredible this season. But Colson, in a lot of places, including, Just Baseballs and some other places, has gone down to 3, even 4 in the system now from one rough season where he was probably pushed aggressively to AAA. He was in the Arizona Fall League last year, didn't have the best results there, comes into Charlotte, has a rough season, finishes his September, the last month of the season, in AAA, very strong. So the White Sox pivot when he wasn't initially going to be on the roster and say, hey, let's get you to Arizona and keep this kind of momentum rolling. Let's see what we can work with here from these past few weeks of Charlotte and see if it carries over to Arizona. Colson Montgomery's first 7 games in Arizona, Jeff, he is 6 for 17 with 9 walks. So that is an on-base percentage of 600 through his first 7 games. And obviously, pitching being not quite elite level has to do with that, 9 walks and, whatever that is, right? But a double, a home run, 6 RBIs in those 6 hits, right? 4 stolen bases. That's another little tidbit there from Colson. He looks more just ready. His at-bats are smart. He's taking pitches. He's leading the Glendale Desert Dogs in OPS right now, largely in part to that ridiculous walk rate, of course. But Colson looks really good, Jeff, and he looks really confident in the box, which is something we just didn't see from him at parts of this season.
Couple of thoughts, Elijah. Number one, the 4 stolen bases in 1 week tell me that he's healthy.
Yeah.
We kind of wondered on and off how much injury he was playing with during the regular season, and maybe that was part contributing to whatever was going on. But at least he's healthy now, and that's a great sign. And the second thing is, he's teased us before with good weeks. Maybe nothing quite like this, but he's kind of teased us before. But this is different. People who have eyes on him, like our buddy Dylan, they're saying this is vintage Colson. This is not a fluky week. And that's what's so encouraging, is that people who know his swing, who know his plate approach, they're just so fired up about what he's doing.
Yeah, it seems like a really good thing. And again, we need to see this continue, right? The Arizona Fall League still goes for a little under a month now, right? So I want to keep seeing this, of course. But just seeing him look comfortable and seeing him take pitches the way he did in 2022 and 2023 even, he just looks more like himself, right? There was times this year where it felt like he was kind of selling out for power. He was over swinging a little. The 9 walks, let me mention also 1 strikeout in these 7 games right now. So for a guy that strikeout rate was higher than it had ever been in his career this past season in Charlotte, we're seeing that come down. We're seeing him be patient. We're seeing him wait for his pitches and find his spots to do damage where he doesn't feel like he has to do damage, right? I think a lot, honestly, of Colson's thing this year was approach. I think he was trying to add impact, but it resulted in a lack of what he's best at doing, which is being patient and finding his spots and doing damage when he knows he can do damage, not doing damage when he feels like he has to do damage,
Right. Absolutely.
So very encouraging sign. One thing to mention about Colson, though, he's playing third base. They're part of it, I do think, is just a roster situation, right? The Reds, Edwin Arroyo, one of their top prospects, was injured most of the season. He's a natural shortstop. The Reds really want him playing shortstop. I think part of it is that he's getting a lot of those shortstop reps, which is kind of limiting Colson to getting reps at shortstop. When you're on a roster of all top prospects and such, right? You have to make some adjustments. With that said, all things I've heard, I was talking to Aram Layton about this a little bit. All things I've heard indicate that Colson looks really good at third base and that he looks comfortable, and that because of his size right now, he's a big dude. He's bulked up a ton in his past 2 seasons with the organization, right? A lot of things I'm hearing and seeing, are that he looks really good at third. And it's kind of telling potentially that he's playing third more than he's playing short so far in the fall league. I don't know what to quite make of it. I think it's partly just due to the roster, but it's going to be interesting to see kind of come spring training where he gets some reps in Arizona in the spring after playing a lot of third here in the fall.
Yeah, that is an interesting development, and maybe it is just the roster. But I've always felt like the White Sox have been playing horrible defense the last couple of years, and Chris Getz has alluded to it, that he wants to improve the defense. And I think the White Sox in 2025, 2026 are going to be much better defensively if Colson's at third and you've got some guy with a slick glove and a good arm at shortstop, even if he can't hit. I mean, that's a
Right.
really, really strong left side of the defense.
Right. So at some point soon, we'll do an episode where we really break down and project kind of the roster next year, because I started doing that in my article this week, and I'm kind of in that mindset of like, what is this roster going to look like come March? But the interesting thing there is, like, if you put Colson at third, there's a few factors, right? Like, what does that mean for Brian Ramos?
Right.
What does that mean for Miguel Vargas? And then what does that mean for Brooks Baldwin? Because it makes me think that they would then maybe feel comfortable shifting Brooks back to shortstop, because he did play shortstop for much of the season last year in Birmingham, and then even somewhat when he was at this brief few games in Charlotte, right? So, like, do the White Sox feel better about a Colson Montgomery at third, Brooks at short, Ramos Vargas competing for second? Do they feel better about that than they feel about Ramos third, Colson short, Brooks second, Vargas second or third? Like, it's going to be interesting, because I do think that they're going to lean into this youth lineup. I think that maybe not off the bat, there might be one veteran signed for those three positions to kind of fill a gap for now. But generally speaking, I think the majority of the season, those four guys are going to be the four guys manning those three positions for the most part. I have no idea how they're going to lay it out, honestly.
Yeah, and it's impossible to predict, because who knows who's going to reach their ceiling and who isn't. But yeah, I think Brian Ramos and especially Miguel Vargas, I mean, they've got to earn their way onto the roster, and they've got to force their way. You know, Ramos has got to force his way to play third base,
Right.
or demonstrate he can play another position.
Right.
But I think the default is Colson at third and someone else at short.
That is what it seems like potentially right now. So we'll see. On the rest of the Arizona Fall League, right? DJ Gladney, not a ton going on there. He's played in 6 games, a few hits here and there. Tim Elko has 2 big home runs, but also 12 strikeouts and 22 at bats. That's the thing we've been worried about with Elko forever. When he faces high level pitching, 12 strikeouts and 22 bats is just not going to cut it. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they kind of progress. But for now, not a ton to talk about there on the Elko and Gladney front. On the pitching side of things, Grant Taylor, the numbers aren't good. Like, if somebody were to not watch any of these clips and just go and pull up Arizona Fall League stats, and they see Grant Taylor with an 11 ERA across his first 2 starts, whatever, I don't care. I just am not. I really don't care about the baseline stats, right? Like, the stats are ugly. Cool, fine. Grant Taylor's stuff is disgusting, Jeff, and he's learning how to pitch right now against. I mean, you got to remember, like, yes, this guy's advanced, and we talk about him a lot. He's only thrown 5 games of affiliated ball, and it was in single A. The hitters he's facing right now are top prospects from double and triple A. This was a very aggressive decision to put Taylor in the Arizona Fall League, because the team wants him to get innings and wants him to go into next season a little more ramped up, healthy, feeling good. I don't care what the results are. Getting him innings and seeing how nasty the stuff is for Grant Taylor, obviously the priority. His second start was already much better than his first. He looked comfortable. The strikeouts were humming. He hung a few pitches and got hit hard. Fine, so be it. The guy's throwing 98 with 19 inches of induced vertical break, in addition to a nasty slider, or a nasty curveball, a really effective cutter. Grant Taylor is so exciting, and the numbers don't matter to me, Jeff. I'm watching this guy pitch and seeing clips of him pitching and saying, this guy is what we think he could be.
Yeah, I think you're right. If you look at the pitching numbers for all of the White Sox guys in Arizona, Peyton Pallette, Fraser Ellard, they're all just awful. But that, you're right, that has nothing to do with it. Those are 3 really good arms, and Taylor in particular, he dominated high A in his 5 starts, and you're right, he's got to learn how to pitch a little more
100%.
strategically. But oh my gosh, his stuff will play anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, completely. You're looking at an average of 97 miles an hour on the fastball. He's averaging upwards of 94 almost on the cutter in his few starts. I'm looking at the numbers right now. I mean, the curveball, then you have that crazy amount of separation with the curveball down at 86 or 83, pardon me, and then the slider up at 86, 87 range. Like, it is such a unique, he's mixing in some changeups too, such a unique pitch mix. The stuff is lively, a ton of vertical break on his stuff. I mean, it's really exciting to see him just get innings. And again, I don't care about the results. If he can give you 15 innings and 20 innings in the fall league to show that he's fully healthy to get a minor league season in next year, this is a guy that we expect to be in the bigs in 2026, frankly. Like, I don't see why not, with one full season of minor league baseball next year, that he couldn't be a big league piece in 2026.
Elijah, I know we'll get into this in a future episode, but do you see Taylor starting in Winston or
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah,
starting
it's Winston. It
half a
Canny, there's no
dozen
way.
starts?
I think he'll be in Birmingham sooner than later. I think
Yeah,
you don't want to push it because he still has such a lack of innings, and the fall league is a great experience. But there's no chance he goes back to Canny. He was way too good there.
I
There's
know.
a slight chance he could go to Birmingham, but I do think it's Winston for 5 to 10 starts, depending on how he does, and then it's Birmingham for the rest of the season. Probably. I think that's what you. I think it's pretty much exactly what we saw from Noah Schultz last year, where he gets 7 or 8 starts in Winston. He looked good enough. Hey, here you go. Go to Birmingham. Spend the rest of the year there. You're on a pitch limit somewhat, but you're going to just get a start every week in Birmingham. Boom. I think it's probably pretty much the exact same plan as the way they handled Noah Schultz last year, honestly.
Yeah, probably so. Even build up innings, the whole bit.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. I think it's probably a little bit less of a restriction just because I think Taylor's a bigger dude. He has full years of college experience, right? But I think it's a pretty similar plan to the Schultz plan, in which case, we're looking at Schultz being up sometime this year. So I think sometime 2026 for Taylor is really realistic, honestly. And I'm excited to see. Like you mentioned, some of the relievers, right? Like there's been some really good things. There's been some positive signs from some of these guys. Peyton Pallette has had some really nice pitches. He's also hung a few, gotten hit hard. Same with Eric Adler. This looked good. Anthony Hoopy Tuanatoa has had some pretty good games as well. I know, not bad with the name, right?
Going off again.
I've got it down at this point, I think. But he's had a few good games. He had a really good game yesterday, actually, down there, but also has had some rough ones as well. So again, there's a balance, right? Like we're going to see ups and downs. This league in general has been very hitter dominant in the first 2 weeks now, right? So like, let's take it with a grain of salt with the pitchers. I'm not too worried about any pitcher stats. I think all these guys that the White Sox have there are 2025 roster options on the pitching side. All those relievers, right? Like any of those relievers we're mentioning could be guys that are in the big leagues next year, right? So let's just get them innings, see what they got, keep it rolling, let them face some of these elite hitters, and just see where it takes them, right? So I think very positive things so far in my eyes on the fall league side of things. And it's exciting to keep watching. I'm hoping I'm going to get to actually lock in on a few more games once some of these playoffs for major leagues slow down a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. One last quick note about Grant Taylor. Not only does he have all these great pitches and a fascinating pitch mix, but he's got a starter's frame. I mean, I see a Justin Verlander type
Yeah,
physique. I mean, he's big and
100%.
strong. He can handle it. Yeah.
No, definitely. Completely true. All right. Well, we will keep talking about the fall league the next few weeks here. And then at some point, we'll kind of hopefully get a few of those guys. I'll probably hopefully try and grab a few of the fall league guys to come talk a little bit on Do a Pod just to hear about the fall league experience because we did that last year and it was great. But let's get to our main segment today, which is kind of the Mike Shirley draft era. And like I said at the beginning of the show, like 2020 was a mess. There was only 5 rounds. It was COVID. We're not even talking about that. 2021 still really tricky, right? Like there was not the same level of scouting and talking to guys and getting information that there was in former or prior drafts, right? Like it was a hard situation. It was Shirley's first full draft in power. Let's go through 2021 and then we'll move into the next 2 years because 21 there's still some guys he hit on, but it also was a really complicated year to be drafting. Obviously, Colson Montgomery, we just talked about him. That was the first pick in 2021. He was when he was drafted, it was like, okay, the White Sox got, an elite high school projectable guy, right? Lefty, big, powerful, was pretty lean at the time, right? But has clearly put on a lot of strength since then. Basketball superstar in high school, right? Like just an all-around beast of an athlete, which is, and the projectable swing, potentially a shortstop, right? He's able to hit the ball all over. That pick was a good one, right? We're going to see what happens. Obviously, there's still time to tell, where things take us. But Colson Montgomery was the first pick in that draft, and I think you can comfortably say that it was a quality pick to start the draft by Mike Shirley.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hey, before we dive into this a little bit, let me go off on one quick tangent.
Yeah.
Like you, I'm thrilled with what Mike Shirley has done, but I know nothing about him. Do you know anything about him, his background?
I know a little. I know he worked for a few other teams. I want to say he was a player. I know for a fact he was a player early in his career, but I don't think he got past the minor leagues. So I'm curious. I'd have to look a little bit more into like his background. But I know he was with. Let's see. Let's check it out real quick. Might as well.
Yeah, sure. And I apologize for putting you on the
question.
spot.
No, it's okay. No problem at all. I'm trying to find information, but I don't see a ton. But I think Shirley's a guy he was a long-term scout. I know for sure. Let's see. He was a scout with the organization. He was the assistant director of scouting for a while and was a cross checker for 8 years before. So generally speaking, was a key scout and part of development with the White Sox for 10 years or so before becoming the scouting director. I think, he seems like he's kind of just a player turned into scout and developer and cross checker and then eventually director, right? So he's kind of worked his way up the ranks. And like we've said, I think he's done a pretty good job so far.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's dive into this 21 draft here. We started with Colson Montgomery. The next pick was Wes Kath. Tricky, right? Like Wes Kath is a tough one because we saw some good signs from him this year, and this was an aggressive high school pick, right? He was drafted at 18 years old, high schooler. He was ranked as the 34th player in the draft, and the White Sox got him at the 57th overall in the second round, right? So, hypothetically, pretty good value first baseman. I think the idea at the time was, Kath was going to be the shortstop third base combo. It was Kath and Colson, and obviously Colson has grown a lot quicker than Kath has. I haven't given up all hope for Kath. I think there's still something in there. We saw some good things this year compared to last year, but definitely for a second round pick, you'd like to have seen a little more at this point, right?
Yeah, the strikeout rate is just so high that he's got the power. There's no doubt that he's developing
100%.
power. He's getting bigger and stronger. I've watched him since he first started at Canny. Every year he's bigger and stronger, looks more like an athlete. But it's much like Tim Elko. The strikeout rate's going to make him or break him.
Yeah, 100%. So we'll see what happens with Kath. I wouldn't call it a poor pick yet, but for a second rounder, it's hard to gauge kind of the value there at this point. Third rounder is our guy Sean Burke, who I mentioned earlier. Sean Burke, it's been a very up and down path for him. Like the White Sox drafted him after he missed his first year of college from Tommy John, right? He got Tommy John right at the beginning of his college career. Then he had a COVID season. Then he really didn't have much of a college career, right? It was very, very up and down. Still, the stuff stood out. 6'6", electric stuff. The White Sox took a shot at him, overslotted him by almost $300,000 in the third round. Way over slot draft pick. And it's taken time. Last year was rough. He had some injuries again. But Sean Burke is going to be in the White Sox rotation come opening day, Jeff. So all things considered for a third round pick, it hasn't been an easy path, but looking like a pretty good pick based on, projection and possibilities for what Burke could be.
You're right. If you just look at the 2021 draft at the top 3 picks and just evaluate it off that, it's fantastic. It's a great start to the Mike Shirley regime with Colson and Burke, and we'll see about Kath. But even if he doesn't pan out, these other two guys are mainstays in all likelihood.
Yeah, 100%. That's the hope. And for a draft that was still really hard, and we're going to get into the other ones that are definitely deeper in general, having two guys that are, significant big league pieces, hopefully, is already a pretty good draft for a guy's first full draft as the director of, scouting, right?
Right. And we've got, as we go through the 2021 draft, there's some other
pieces here for sure. So
it's not
Brooks
quantity, but there's some quality.
Exactly. Brooks Goswin was the fourth round pick, a heavy underslot pick. They had to save money because they overslotted both Kath and Burke in the second and third rounds, right? Goswin was released at the beginning of the season by Winston-Salem, 3 years out of the organization, had some good moments and was an upside pick, but unfortunately is not with the organization anymore. Going on to the fifth round is Tanner McDougal, really fascinating guy. He's the third high school pick in this draft, right? So there was the 3 early high school picks. It's pretty rare for the White Sox to go 3 high school in their first 5 picks. McDougal was a guy that they also overslotted significantly, right? So part of this draft was like, I don't want to say it was they were stacking heavy, right? They were stacking on top, right? They went significantly over slot for all 3 of the first 5 picks, right? So the second, third, and fifth round, they had to spend a lot more than the slot value, which is also part of why we see a lot of these later picks that have kind of, fallen off the roster or aren't with the organization anymore because they spent a lot early. And McDougal was an upside play, right? This was a high school arm with a ton of stuff, still has a ton of stuff. It hasn't been an easy road for him, right? He had TJ, had to work his way back. Last year had some good signs. This year struggled a lot at Winston, goes back down to Canny, finished the season strong. But, similarly to Kath, like there's a lot there, but we would have liked to see a little bit more growth and development in terms of command, especially for McDougal, given that it's, 3 years into his career now.
Well, we've talked to some White Sox coaches and everyone is still high on him.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
When you watch him pitch, you understand why. He's
100%.
got a big fastball. He's got a nice breaking pitches. and he's still very young. So I can really see him having a bright future. I can see a
I
path.
hope so for
Yeah,
sure. And he's only 21, right? He was drafted
right.
as a young 18-year-old when he was drafted, right? He was really young for his class already. So he had just turned 18 come draft time, basically. Like, there's still something there. 21 years old. McDougal's got a lot of stuff. Not giving up on that pick at all. As a fifth rounder, I think that's the type of upside swing you want to take in a high school arm as well. So I don't dislike that pick whatsoever. I feel good about that pick, actually. The next two picks, Taylor Broadway in the sixth, is not with the organization anymore. He's with Boston, I believe, now in their minor league system. And then Theo Denlinger is also not with the organization. I remember, don't remember him even pitching much for the organization. I'll be perfectly honest. I remember he pitched in Winston or Birmingham for a while in 2022 as a kind of a relief arm. Got up a little bit, but is now with Boston as well. Actually, both those guys are with the Red Sox organization now in the minor leagues. It happens, right? There's picks, right? And I think those guys were significant underslots, but actually both of them were senior signings, fifth-year senior signings, actually. So those were basically, again, you don't want to say giveaway picks, but like two fifth-year seniors in the sixth and seventh round were making up for the money you spent on McDougal and Burke and Kath, essentially. And then, followed up with a guy who was another fifth-year signing, but has gone a very different direction. In the eighth round is Fraser Ellard, who was actually the first of anybody from this draft class to debut for the White Sox, which is pretty incredible considering he was, a $20,000 signing bonus as a fifth-year lefty out of Liberty University. Go Fraser Ellard. Shout out to my guy. Shout out to John Stott, who's an agent, or who's a scout for the White Sox, who was one of the scouting guys who signed Fraser Ellard. Fraser is a guy that was for a fifth year minimal expectation, right? And is a legit bullpen piece in Chicago now, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about the very decent likelihood that he makes the team out of spring training next year.
He should completely. I see no reason he shouldn't. I mean, he looked really good in the last month or two. He had, I think we talked about this before, but he had a rough major league debut and was then probably one of the best, if not the best, consistent relief arm down the stretch for the White Sox in the last month of the season. So Ellard's a guy that, eighth round pick, $20,000. That's a good find. That is definitely a good find. If you can save that type of money, because they had to save so much money from those early picks, and get a guy that's now a legit bullpen piece, that's a huge win. So even in a draft that doesn't look great, it looks pretty decent, right? I mean, all things considered.
Well, you've got 4 out of your top 8 players who look like they're going to help you.
High upside, for sure.
Yeah, high upside guys who look like they're going to contribute. So, I mean, that alone is I think that's really solid.
Yeah, 100%. And then Gil Luna in the ninth, a guy that another senior signing, $10,000 bonus, right? It was basically everybody from the sixth round on was most of the picks from then on were saving money because they spent so much early. So Gil Luna they get for a $10,000 bonus. He's a quality reliever in Double A right now. I'm not sure he's got a big league future, but he's had some good games generally speaking in the minors. I mean, he had a very good season for Birmingham, actually, a 2.8 ERA this year. Pretty solid numbers across the board. Strikeouts are pretty high. The only thing with Luna is his command is definitely pretty iffy. But Luna's a guy that he could be in Charlotte this year. There's a good chance that he cracks the Charlotte roster to start the year or pretty soon into the year. Also, there's a world he's a big league piece, and that's a $10,000 senior signing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then moving beyond that, Tommy Summer in the 10th round, he pitched last year. I want to say he got hurt. Oh no, he got released at the beginning of the season. So Summer no longer with the organization, was released this past year. And then Christian Edwards, who was he was still with Canny down the season, wasn't he? He's part of the season. Oh, he was with Canny and then he got released mid-season. So Christian Edwards is a guy that was with Canny, had some decent moments, but moves on from there. Again, a lot of these signs late were definitely underslot guys. So there's not a ton of expectation, but Summer no longer with the organization. Same with Edwards, also no longer with the organization. Johnny Ray is an interesting one. He was signed actually at slot value. It was decent for a little while. He had some good games in 2022 in Kannapolis, I think, but then also was released this past season. So, there's give and take. Every draft class is going to have a lot of guys that don't pan out. That's just how baseball works. But so those next 3 arms are all no longer with the team anymore. Colby Smelly was a 13th rounder. Smelly's still with the organization. He's doing his thing. Smelly was a guy that was, he made, who did he play for mostly this year?
Winston.
I believe he played mostly in Winston, right?
Well,
Yeah,
I
and then
think
he
he
got
led them in hitting for most of the season.
yeah, Smelly had a decent season in Winston,
Yeah.
honestly. He had 63 games catching for them, some pretty good, solid numbers across the board. Seems like he's a good defensive catcher. Probably more of an organizational depth piece, right? But generally speaking, it's a depth catcher in the 13th round who stuck around for a few years. I'm okay with that. I don't mind that at all. Noah Owen in the 14th. Also, I'm pretty sure no longer with the organization. Went to the Angels organization for a little bit, bounced around. Another pitcher, Cameron Butler, I think, is one of the most, I would say, slightly disappointing guys from this draft because he was a high school pick. It's pretty rare to get a high school pick that late in the draft in the 15th round, and he was the hopefully upside high school guy. Played with the White Sox rookie ball for 2 seasons. Ended up being released in 2023, and then down the line, Terrell Tatum in the 16th round is Terrell Tatum was a key piece for Birmingham this year. So maybe not a big league piece, right? I think we've talked about Tatum had a lot of hype last year. He had a huge 2023. This year definitely struggled at most of this season, but great defense, great speed, good on base skills for Tatum. That's a guy who, could be a big leaguer.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. Yeah, there was a bit of a dry spell here between the ninth and 15th rounds, but then in the latter rounds, you
Yeah.
get John Gusenberg, Adam Hackenberg, and Terrell Tatum, and
Yeah.
maybe not future
Right.
White Sox guys, but could pan out. Could
Yeah, they're generally depth guys, organizational depth guys, but late round 16th, 18th, and 19th round, getting three guys that are all played double or triple A ball this year, we'll take that for sure. And then Jason Gonzalez in the 17th, not with the organization anymore, and then Halen Green, who was with the organization, had a pretty decent year in Birmingham last year, but is also he was released at the beginning of the season, not with the organization anymore as well. But that's 2021. All things considered, for a first draft in control, not a bad draft by Mike Shirley. There's definitely some ups and downs, and he spent really aggressively. So I think the success of a Burke and a McDougal and a Kath is really the tipping point for this draft because you overslotted those three guys so heavily. You ended up signing a bunch of seniors, but Ellard, Tatum, there's some good guys within that rank. So all things considered, pretty solid. But let's move to 2022 because we took a little bit of time there. And I want to talk about some of these more recent drafts and see where guys are at right now, because this is where it gets a lot deeper, I would say, in terms of, the plethora of solid pieces throughout a draft. 2022, Noah Schultz is the starter of that draft in the first round, signed for, I believe, right about slot value. Yeah, super projectable high school guy. We don't need to talk about Noah Schultz. We spent a lot of time on Noah Schultz. Noah Schultz is a stud. He's the number one prospect in the system for a reason. Great pick, Mike Shirley. That's all I got to say about that one.
Yeah.
Peyton Pallette and then Jonathan Cannon were the second and third picks in this draft. Pallette, a guy they drafted him when they knew he was coming off TJ. He still signed for over slot value because of the upside, because he was phenomenal. Going to be a first round pick if he didn't undergo surgery. He would have been a first round pick for sure. Getting him in the second round at the end of the second round, pretty good value. Jonathan Cannon, also an over slot guy. He was a projected second rounder, super consistent, high level guy, in college, right? Looks like a high floor quality arm. That's exactly what Cannon has become. Cannon's already in the big leagues. This was, again, it's pretty crazy actually that Cannon, 2022 draft pick, debuted early 2024 and was actually a starter for the majority of the season for the White Sox as well.
Yeah, that's three really stud arms, and Cannon just flew through the system. I think we were all shocked when he started this year at AAA, but proved worthy of it.
Yeah, and Pallette, right? Like obviously Pallette's career didn't start the way we wanted to. And then last year he struggled coming off of TJ. This year he really struggled as a starter. Shifts to the bullpen, is the best reliever in the system right now. So we'll see if they try to shift him back to a starter. I kind of is it unfair of me to say I just want him to stay in the bullpen because I think he's just that good there? And the White Sox have so much depth. I mean, I get the idea of wanting to maximize value on a guy, right? Especially a second round pick, a guy with Pallette's talent. I'd kind of prefer he just sticks in the bullpen. I think we're seeing now more than ever. I don't know how much of the postseason you've watched, but like how incredibly dependent are teams on some of their top relievers right now.
Right.
It is nuts to see the shift in Major League Baseball to how important bullpens have become. Bullpens are literally winning playoff series right now. Like if we get to the World Series and it's, let's say, Dodgers Yankees, which it seems like it might be right now, or Dodgers Guardians even, right? Like those are the best bullpens in baseball in the playoffs, and those are the teams we're seeing in the World Series potentially.
Right.
There's something to that. Like there is a legit reason this is happening, and because of arm injuries and all these other factors, bullpen pitchers are more important than ever. And having a guy like Peyton Pallette who can go 2-3 innings out of the bullpen and be as good as he's been out of the bullpen, I hope he stays there, frankly.
Yeah, when he moved to the bullpen, just about every outing, I think like maybe all but one or two were 2 inning outings. And I can't remember. He had a stretch between in August and into September where he didn't give up any earned runs. I mean, he was dominant in 2 inning stints. So you wonder, does that the fact that he can go multiple innings, is he, can he be a starter? That's an interesting question, but yeah, at the very least, he looks like a guy who can eat multiple innings and be very
100%.
effective.
Yeah, definitely. So to be determined on Paulette, but generally speaking, I think from a draft perspective, you feel pretty good about those three picks, considering you're expecting those three guys to be in the major league roster. Within 2 to 3 years of being drafted, you're expecting all three of those guys to be major league pieces one way or another, right? So that's a pretty
Yep.
good start to a draft. Fourth round was Jordan Sprinkle. Shout out my school, UC Santa Barbara. Hasn't quite clicked for Sprinkle. This was a guy who, I watched him a ton in college. I watched my first year of college. He was at my school, and I watched, 20, 30 games of his probably. Slick fielder, always had a little bit of an issue with consistent contact, right? I think that's kind of continued into the major leagues. He's had some injuries too that have held him back a little bit. Still a guy that you look at and you're hopeful can keep growing one way or another. But this year it didn't quite work for him in Winston. We'll see if he comes back strong. He's probably going to start in Winston again. So not necessarily someone you're out on quite yet, but definitely would like to see a little more from him.
Yeah, looking like an Org guy for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah. But then we come to
Yeah.
the
The
fifth
next
and
two.
sixth round picks. Tyler Schweitzer at 5, Eric Adler at 6. Schweitzer had a phenomenal year. He made about as much much gains as any pitcher in the system. I mean, he dramatically improved.
100%. And the profile is still similar, I think, to what it was, right? I think coming out of college, he was the high floor back end starter type of guy, like funky lefty back end starter. That's about what he is, right? But he looked really good this year. He looked really impressive in Birmingham. He was one of the guys, like you said, that showed us more growth and development and progression than almost anybody else in terms of the pitching in the system this year. So Schweitzer is a guy that has gone from, more or depth, I think, before the year or even last year, right, to someone who now could be a potential big league inning eater type of guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, and like you were saying, baseball now is just dependent on relievers. There are so many bullpen games, and you could easily see him being
A
some
swing
guy
guy,
who
yeah.
comes out of the bullpen and eats the fifth, sixth, seventh innings.
100%, yeah. And then Eric Adler is a guy that, was drafted, a rare guy drafted as basically as a reliever, right? You don't see that often. He was an underslot draft pick coming out of Wake Forest and is someone who, looks like a big league reliever. He's at the Arizona Fall League, like we mentioned, and is someone who I think we're going to see on the big league roster in the pretty near future, probably this season.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
next few picks, Mark McLaughlin, still with the organization, has had some good moments here and there, but definitely not a ton of development on that front. I mean, he played this season between rookie ball and then he played. No, he didn't. He only played one game there, so he was in Canny all season. Haven't seen a ton there in terms of development, but definitely still within the organization, still a depth piece. And then you go to Mario Camilletti in the eighth, who made his way all the way to Birmingham this year. And Camilletti, 25 years old, definitely an older guy, right? He was kind of a money saver, right? He was a fifth-year draft pick, 20K signing bonus. So basically a money-saving pick there. But, when you look at the numbers, he's had a pretty good season. He's got really good, on base skills and good discipline and has been solid. And I think he'll be a consistent piece in Birmingham next year.
Yeah, yeah. We could spend 2 hours on the rest of this draft. There's so many
Yeah,
guys on
it's
the
pretty
list.
crazy. Yeah.
I want to go back to Mark McLaughlin for a little bit, just briefly, because at the end of the season, he turned it up a notch, and he was one of Pat Leland's most reliable arms in
Yeah.
the playoffs. Now, he didn't have a lot of reliable arms, so he would turn to McLaughlin for like 2 inning stints every other game, and he was money. So, I mean, it's still going to be a long shot, but he's got the pedigrees from University of Tennessee, and maybe his uptick here at the end of the season will
Yeah, 100%.
represent some.
Um, the next two guys, both fifth-year guys, money-saving picks, right? But fifth-year seniors, Michael Turner and Tim Elko, have both become, pieces in the system, right? I think Elko is going to have a shot at big league innings next year, right? From a 10th round, $35,000 fifth-year signing. And Michael Turner, was a pretty good piece, also in the Arizona Fall League, I should mention, right? And is a pretty good season. I love talking to Turner. He's a good guy to talk to for sure. Is a really, really good catcher. So at the very least, you've got an excellent defensive catcher and someone who I could see being a big league backup at some point in his career. If he progresses a little with the bat, Turner's got the defense to be a big league backup catcher. So two fifth-year guys for fifth-year guys in the 9th and 10th rounds, saving money, really, really solid picks. And then from there, you go to two kind of we'll see what happens type of hitters in a Jacob Burke, who was an overslot guy, a lot of upside there with Burke, and then a Brooks Baldwin, who's in the big leagues this year. And this is a 22 draft. This was only 2 years ago, and Brooks Baldwin's a big leaguer this season. Just up and down, almost every player we've talked about is at the very least a high-level org depth with a chance of being a big leaguer.
Yeah. McLaughlin, Camilletti, Turner, Elko, Burke, Baldwin. Turner, I could see, going to spring training and then probably ending up in Charlotte. But he's that third catcher that when someone gets hurt, he goes up.
Yeah, he might still be behind a Hackenberg or maybe even not. But I mean, he in terms of like potential, right? I think he is the third guy in terms of how long-term potential behind a Caro and a Lee, right? And then 13th round, after all that, you get a string right there. That's 5 college hitters, right? And then you follow it up with Jacksonville University, Mason Adams in the 13th round for only $75,000, a senior signing. Did anybody know who Mason Adams was? Like, I'll be honest, right? Like, I don't know if anybody did. I don't think I did when he got drafted, right? Mason Adams is one of my favorite pitchers in the entire system, Jeff, and a top 10 prospect in the White Sox system now.
Yeah, and again, that speaks to how we started the show. It's the genius of Mike Shirley to recognize that this guy in the 13th round has got a nice potential.
Yeah, exactly. Shane Murphy in the 14th, another guy that's organizational, solid depth, pitched in both in Winston and Birmingham this year, had some good games for sure. Funky lefty, eats innings, had a good season. Another guy that's, at the very least depth, right? And then not a ton of, memorable guys in the last 6 rounds here. Tristan Stivers is one guy that could be a reliever piece at some point. He had a good 2023. Drake Logan is a guy that had some big at-bats there at the end of the season for Canny as well, which is cool. Bryce Willits had a decent season in Winston-Salem. Some solid guys, right? Obviously, late round picks. Nobody in these last 5 rounds that you like hit big on, like some other drafts we're going to talk about. But generally speaking, Jeff, this 22 draft is a really, really solid draft by Mike Shirley.
Yeah. Of the 4 that we're going to talk about today, it is it's by far the best. I mean, it's so impressive.
The deepest too. There's a lot of depth in this draft. And it just shows that like this is not the same type of draft from 5 years prior to this draft when there was just every up and down the roster. You can see guys that were released within 2 years of being drafted. We're 2 years out from this draft, and more guys on this draft than not are potential big league pieces in the future, which is incredible.
Yeah. You and I went through like the previous 10 year, like, I don't know,
right.
10 years prior to 2021. And I think the 22 draft class has more potential upside guys than those 10 years had.
100%. I don't disagree at all. So it's, a very solid draft all around. Obviously, we need to see what these guys do in the big leagues, right? We've only seen Cannon and a few other, and Brooks, right, at this point. But there's a lot to like in this draft. From a standpoint of adding talent to the organization, this draft added a lot of talent. 2023, another draft that, added some talent. Again, it's still a little too early with these 23 and 24 drafts for us to really know anything. I think 22 is the most recent one where we can really say like, oh, this is a good draft. 23, 24, hard to gauge for sure. It's only been a year for some of these guys or a few months for some of these guys, right? 2023 still does overall look like a pretty quality draft. Jacob Gonzalez finished the year strong in Birmingham, was excellent during the playoffs. I have never been super high on his upside personally, but I do think he did some things well this year. He's already in Birmingham, right? If that's your first round pick, they underslotted him too. They saved about a little over $500,000 on the Gonzalez pick in the first round in 2023. I think it's a solid pick, all things considered. I'm really curious to see what this next year brings for Gonzalez, because I think 2025 is going to be somewhat of a make or break in terms of him being a first round type of player, right?
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's a big year for him. He's very controversial. It's hard to know what his upside is going to be. But then we're going to look at picks 2 through 7, and man, it's another home run by Mike Shirley, starting at number 2 with our guy Grant Taylor.
Yeah, we talked about him earlier. Grant Taylor was, ranked way lower than a second rounder, but coming because he was dealing with the injuries, coming off of TJ, right? Signed for at slot value, a draftable sophomore, right? So he was pretty young at the time of the draft. The White Sox love what they have there with Taylor. Seth Keener, we really like the upside there. He had a kind of was transitioning into being a starter this year. Definitely not, the best first season, but at the same time, a lot of things to like for Keener, and we're excited to see. I think 25 is going to be a big year for him to really grow and develop. Calvin Harris, catching prospect out of Ole Miss. someone who had some good moments, but I still don't think we've really gotten to see much upside from Harris. I'm excited to see another full season of him. I know he had a little bit of injuries this year, some other stuff as well. So excited to see what we get from Harris, pardon me. But haven't seen much yet. Christian Opper, kind of a total wild card to a degree, if that's fair to say. I think we just don't know yet. We haven't seen Opper throw much. He threw in the Arizona Complex League, had some good games, but definitely struggled. Was an overslot pick in the 5th. That's one of the early picks that could look a little bit of a reach there, maybe, considering we haven't seen much from him, but still very young. Definitely a chance Opper takes a step forward. Lucas Gordon, solid, dependable college arm, had a good first season between Canny and Winston. Another, 6th round for an underslot pick, right? George Walco in the 7th. Obviously, we're big fans of George Walco. Way over slot signing, pull the guy away from his commitment from his college commitment. And 17 years old, right? Gets drafted. Ton of upside. That was a very intelligent pick. I remember covering this draft and I kind of predicted that pick, and it was a pretty cool moment for me and just the organization too, because I think they strategically saved money for that pick and were preparing for that pick. Really like it there. And then we go down to just a kind of a variety of experienced college guys. Starting off with Eddie Park, Jeff. Where are you at with Eddie Park? What would you say?
Well, I think this was a down season for him. It's not. I think we were looking for a little more offense from him. I mean, he's a good defender, a good base runner, but the bat really didn't play that as strong as we'd hoped this year. So again,
Yeah.
another guy who next season is going to be a make or break year for him.
Yeah, and this again, it's still early for these guys, so it's hard to gauge how this draft class is quite yet. I think it's fun to look at it, but it's hard to really judge a class that's only played a year of professional ball, right? So
Right.
then you've got Jake Peppers, who had some ups and downs, but generally a strong first season in Kannapolis. The stuff is really good. I do think Peppers is a reliever still. I think he's going to be a nasty reliever, though. I think they're going to try and let him go as a starter this season, but I think Peppers is the guy that, like, if you shift him to a bullpen role sometime next season, he could fly through the system as a reliever with his funky release style and the way his stuff moves. Similarly to a Zach Franklin, who was drafted and just immediately became a reliever, was a senior signing, $10,000 bonus. That was it for Zach Franklin, pardon me. And Franklin's a guy that has shot through the system and is another really solid relief prospect as a 10th round senior signing.
Yeah. Jake Peppers got the 9th round pick. He was a different pitcher the second half of the season. He was the
100%.
best arm by far in Kannapolis at the end of the season. So it'll be interesting to see when he goes to Winston and how he fares there.
Yeah, and then Franklin, just one more, like 75 strikeouts and 50 innings for Franklin in his first season out of the bullpen, between 3 levels too, or between multiple levels, right? He pitched in both Winston and Birmingham. Like very, very solid first season from a guy in Zach Franklin, who I think is another relief piece. And then you go to Rikun Nishida, who I'm about to do an interview with soon. Very excited to get to talk to him a little bit. I've never gotten the chance to talk to him yet. Awesome season, right? Like I have no idea what the future holds for a guy like Nishida, but incredible first season, excellent in Canny, makes his way all the way to Birmingham, was a huge piece of Birmingham winning that championship.
Yeah, he's been a real puzzle for me. I kept asking any coach who would listen, what can we expect as he moves up the ladder? And man, he dominated in Winston and he looked excellent in Birmingham. So it remains a fascinating story, and he's got just a really unique skill set.
Yeah, 100%. Matthias Lacumbe, we have no idea. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to act like I know exactly what's going on there. He was from France, late draft pick. It doesn't have any affiliated stats. He went on the IL this year. I think he might have had surgery. I actually don't know. I can't confirm that, but he did go on the 60-day IL in July and hasn't pitched since reportedly. I don't know. We will see. It was a gamble. It was a significant overslot pick though. So there was definitely something that the White Sox saw there because they signed him for $450,000 in the 12th round as an international, junior college guy, right? So going to be interesting to see. I'm very curious to see if he comes back this year and what he looks like potentially because that was the most aggressive draft pick of any of the post George Walco picks actually in terms of money. So interested to see where that goes. Ryan Galeni, another solid first season. Consistent, was good in Canny, very good. Slowed down in Winston. But an experienced college bat, had a good year. Edric Felix, not much so far, mostly in the ACL this year. Carlton Perkins, Weston Eberle, Mikey Kane, Anthony Imhoff. And then Caden Connor is another one we should mention in the 19th there, who had a really solid first season for a 19th rounder out of Cal State Fullerton. And then Garrett Wright rounds it out, who had some good games there later in the season too. Again, too early for a lot of these guys, especially some of these later guys. Weston Eberle actually made his way up through the system pretty quickly and to fill in some innings behind the plate. It's too early to really judge most of these picks. but it looks like a pretty good draft all around to me, Jeff. And I think there's at least a few guys you're kind of hitching your wagon on. I think, Walco and Taylor are going to be kind of and Gonzalez, of course, are going to be kind of the determiners of how good this draft is, because Taylor and Walco are two of the highest highest upside guys in the entire system, right? So I think a lot of this class is going to hitch on them. There's also some really fun question marks, though, with a guy like Opper and Lacumbe and seeing where Peppers goes with his stuff. And there's a lot of potential here that we're still wanting to see kind of come through.
Yeah, and we both like Connor and Galaney, and maybe one of those guys will get hot in Winston, and we'll see him in
100%.
Birmingham sooner than later. For
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. Definitely. Yeah. So still too early with this draft, but in general, feels like a pretty solid draft class again, in comparison, especially to the 5 years prior, of course.
Yeah. Before we go to the 2024 draft class, Elijah, a quick update. We're recording this as the Dodgers and the Mets play game 4 in game 4.
Yeah. Or game 5. Sorry. Dodgers are up 3-1.
Oh, right. Well, the Mets are pounding them 8-1.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Mets are staying alive. Good for them.
Yeah.
That's a crazy team right there in the story about the Mets. Unbelievable. How they're even alive still. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, well, 2024, we're not going to dive into deeply because there's not much to say, right? We haven't seen a lot of these guys play yet. Let's just give a few kind of key update highlights on this draft. I think this is a draft class that we'll get an opportunity to talk about more. Hagen Smith made a few starts in Winston. Hagen Smith is a dog. His initial minor league experience wasn't great. I think we're going to see a 2025 season from Hagen Smith that is like wowing. I think we're going to get kind of some of that like whoa factor from Smith in 2025. And I think, I don't want to rush it, right? But I think you're looking at a guy that should be on the roster in 2026, I think, assuming things go well this season, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can dream on a rotation with Grant Taylor and Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz.
It is a dream.
Really be something special.
Yeah, 3 of the most impressive pitching prospects in terms of upside in baseball, frankly. So I think that's a lot to dream on. I think obviously the Hagen Smith pick caught people off guard because I think everyone was expecting a hitter, and it would have been interesting to see what a hitter would look like. But at the same time, doubling down on another dynamic lefty, I don't mind it. And I think I didn't love it at the time, but I don't mind it, honestly, in retrospect. And I think he's going to be a huge piece. Caleb Bonham and Blake Larson, the high school picks in the 2nd and 3rd round, we've heard nothing but really, really good things about Bonham. He's impressed a ton of people down in the Bridge League when he was playing some scrimmage games in Arizona. Larson, I'm going to get a chance to talk to soon, hopefully, actually. Should be having him on an interview shortly here. Very excited to kind of hear where he's at. I know he had some arm stuff going on, but I'm really excited to see what Larson's up to because we saw a few backfield videos that got posted of him a few weeks ago throwing in Arizona as well. So excited to see what he's going on there. Nick McLean didn't play affiliated balls. He was getting back he had injuries earlier this year. He was getting himself kind of back in game shape. Casey Salke played a little in Winston. Didn't see a ton from him, but I think that's still someone who's going to go right back to Winston next year and get a full season, mostly in Winston, to develop. The most impressive guy from this draft class so far has been Sam Antonacci. Oh my goodness. Sam Antonacci was the most consistent hitter for Kannapolis down the stretch in the last few weeks of the season, and Candy's playoff run too. Ridiculous bat to ball skills and approach for a guy who is coming out of college, right? JUCO, went to Coastal Carolina, overslot pick by the White Sox in this draft. Already, in a few months, Antonacci looks like a very, very good value pick in the 5th round. We'll see how he develops and we'll see if the impact grows. But in terms of initial impression, hard to make a better one than Antonacci did.
Yeah, I think Pat Leland's comparison was to Mario Camilletti. And some people say, well, that's not that great, but no, good bat to ball skills, good defense, right. Good baseball IQ, 100%. Nice upside for sure. And he was a great hitter down the stretch for Canny.
Definitely. Beyond that, there was a lot of money saving picks too in this draft because there was an overslot for Larson, overslot for Bonham, overslot for Hagen Smith as well, right? All 3 of those first picks got overslot. So there was definitely some money saving picks later on, but Jackson Appel, 5th year senior signing, looks like a experienced catcher at the very least, is going to be kind of that, organizational catcher with defense. Had some pretty good at bats as well. Phil Fox, we didn't get to see pitch, but I really like Phil Fox's stuff. I've been really impressed by him. I did an interview with him. You can check that out. Aaron Combs is another guy that initially wowed for sure, to say the least, right? Like I knew he would to a degree because I think when you're drafting a reliever who has that much high leverage experience in college, you expect him to dominate the lower levels. Combs was unbelievable for Kannapolis down the stretch of that playoff run for sure. And is someone who I think he starts in Winston next year, Jeff. But would you be shocked to see him in Birmingham pretty early next year? I would not.
No, absolutely. I mean, he's another guy. I mean, I could see him making his way to Chicago at the end of the year
Yeah,
next year. I mean,
he's
he's
a
that good.
super high. He is a very advanced arm, and I think for an eighth rounder, right? Like if you're going to take a reliever, which they took a lot of relievers in this draft, it's nice to get one who you think is going to be just a very quick riser, which Combs is definitely going to be. Jack Young, Cole McConnell with the next two picks. Haven't seen them play much. Kind of a TBD on both those guys to a degree. Not exactly sure, what to expect there, but we will see what happens. Both underslot guys as well. Seniors, I think they're both senior signings. Yeah, they're both fifth-year signings. Blake Shepardson is an interesting one, kind of an upside swing in the 11th round, someone with a ton of stuff, but has barely pitched. One of my favorite player interviews I've ever done, Jeff, was Blake Shepardson. So I definitely encourage people to go check it out on the FutureSox page with Shepardson. Really interesting mindset, comes from a baseball family. His younger brother was also drafted this year in the same draft. A ton of stuff. Very little pitching experience. He pitched like 20 innings, I think he told me, like all of college, basically. We'll see. Fun project. I like the stuff a lot. Nathan Archer finished his season in Canny as well. Got some good at bats. What was your initial thoughts on Archer, kind of from the brief stint in Canny?
He flashed really good skills at times.
Yeah.
He didn't get a lot of starts in the postseason, so
Right.
it's kind of tough to really get a feel for him. But
Seems like a guy that'll get good innings in Canny though next year again. Repeat Canny. He was a junior signing, right? He wasn't one of the older guys from the draft class. So I think, considering he played in a small conference too, I think he'll get a lot of at bats next year in Kannapolis, which will be good to see what he can do. The next run was some college pitchers: Pierce George, Justin Sinibaldi, Mason Moore, all finished the season in Kannapolis. I like a lot of these guys a lot. I think George is a super high upside reliever. There's a lot to kind of figure out there with his command, but a ton of stuff for George. Sinibaldi, one of those. Sinibaldi and Moore, both kind of those higher floor, hopefully, experienced college starters, probably more, lefty depth guys potentially, or maybe they shift to the bullpen eventually, but two guys that will definitely get significant innings. Sinibaldi the lefty, Mason Moore righty, pardon me on that note, but guys that will get more innings next year. TJ McCants had some really good at-bats in Canny, definitely some swing and miss with McCants, but McCants is a fifth-year senior who was signed for underslot and had some really strong at-bats, yeah?
yeah, I was really impressed with TJ in the postseason run by Kannapolis.
Yeah.
He passes the eye test, big, strong, fast.
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then Lyle Miller Green after that, who Lyle Miller Green is a physical specimen, massive dude, someone that I'm excited to see what happens. He was, it's a weird pick, right? He's a two-way player. He was listed as a two-way player, but I don't think he's going to be pitching. He's probably more of a hitter, but tons of raw power. Definitely somebody to at least keep an eye on next year. I think he'll get a lot of innings in Kannapolis as well. Liam Paddock, another experienced left-handed college starter, had some good moments there down the stretch as well. Nick Pinto, another college lefty starter, senior fifth-year graduate signing, I believe. And Pinto's a guy that, is, again, we don't know with these later guys. It's still definitely too early to kind of tell with them. And then Miles Bailey was the last pick who did not sign. They took the risky high school upside signing in the 20th round just in case one of the early guys didn't sign, then they could give that money towards Miles Bailey. Would have been so cool if Miles Bailey signed, because Miles Bailey is a stud, but he will be going to college, and he will be, maybe the White Sox will revisit that in 3 years. When you draft a guy and you put some faith in a guy, a high school guy, right? If they don't sign from a late round pick, right, you at least have established a connection with them where if Miles Bailey does as good in college as some people think he might do, the White Sox could revisit that in a few years. So you never know.
Quickly, I know we're running out of time. I want to circle back just a couple of guys. We both met Jackson Appel at the same time. Not the biggest guy. That's kind of a concern for me, but a terrific defender, a terrific arm, and the bat at least played in low A. We'll see as he moves up the ladder. But I was really surprised and impressed. He looked good. Aaron Combs, as you said, I mean, he was unhittable in low A, which you would expect, but that was a big arm. We got to see Justin Sinibaldi and Mason Moore. They were kind of forced into starts in the postseason because Kannapolis was running out of arms. So it's tough to get a read on them. Though Mason he battled pretty hard. I think he had 3 shutout innings. They were rough, but he. So yeah. And, like and TJ had the walk-off hit. So,
Right.
yeah.
It's too early, right? Like we don't know. These guys were just drafted 3 months ago, and it's been really cool to get to know a bunch of them. We got to meet a bunch in Canning, and I've interviewed a bunch of them as well. So this draft class is still obviously like we don't know like the 2022. Like 2022 is like, oh, this looks like a really good draft class. This one is like we don't know yet. Generally speaking, Jeff, the last 4 draft classes, courtesy of Mike Shirley, have brought a lot more consistent, projectable talent than any of the 10 years prior, right? When obviously Shirley was still with the organization, but wasn't in charge of any of the drafting, right? So I'm excited. I think it's a good thing. I think there's been steps in the right direction. And I think generally the drafting of quality talent has been much better in recent years than it was for a while.
I think we can both agree that there are tons of high upside pitchers for the bullpen, for the rotation. There's great arms at every level of the system. He's done a great job drafting pitchers. On the hitting
100%.
side, I'm assuming a couple of these bats are really going to pop and surprise
Yeah,
us.
that's what we're hoping. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not the quite depth just yet on the hitting
Right.
side that we're seeing on the pitching side, which is why people
Yes.
wanted the Hagen Smith to be a bat. But
Right.
I'll tell you one thing. I've got a lot of confidence in Mike Shirley after looking at these 4 drafts. I'm sure he'll
Yeah.
address the lack of hitters and going forward, and he'll
Yeah.
remedy that quickly.
Yeah, it's exciting to see. I think we're looking forward to it. That'll do it for this episode. We are going to be back with a lot of fun content soon. So definitely keep an eye on some of these interviews that I'm going to be doing in the next few weeks. Me and Jeff are going to bring some off-season projections, some free agent talk. We'll get some guests on here to come chop it up. So it's going to be a fun time. It's not the same as watching games all the time, but I do enjoy the baseball offseason. I think it's fun. I think it's a cool time to be able to reflect, to be able to project. It's just fun. I think we'll revisit some roster projections last offseason. We did like a projecting the 2026 roster. Would be really fun to do that again, I think, and just see kind of where things have shifted over the year based on the draft classes and trades and everything. So there's a lot of fun stuff coming up. I'm excited to keep talking about it with you throughout the offseason, Jeff.
Yeah, looking forward to it. The World Series ends like the start of November, then you get through the holidays, all of a sudden it's January, and pitchers and catchers are getting ready.
Yep, it
So
happens
it won't,
quick,
it
and then
won't be
winter
long.
meetings and everything. Hopefully, I'm
Yeah.
going to get out to the winter meetings this year, so it should be cool. We will continue to bring you the content, and that'll do it for this episode of the Roundup.